Welcome to Obsessed with Guitars. I am Paul Stedden. I know that these videos are somewhat sparse these days. That's because I have to eat and make a living. But I had a really special opportunity that I wanted to bring you guys with this particular video because it's not often that I do interviews. In fact, I haven't done an interview on this channel in about 5 or 6 years. So I'm excited to be doing this one. The guest this week, and hopefully I'll be able to do more of these, is Norman Harris of Norman's Rare Guitars. Now, if you don't know what Norman's Rare Guitars is, welcome to the world of guitar, because apparently you've never heard of the guitar before. It is the guitar store on this planet. And Norman, I am so happy that you're able to join me. Thank you for taking a few minutes to just basically BS about guitars.
No worries, Paul. I'm glad to hear that you're interested in what I do and all that, and I'm flattered. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Other than Joe Bonamassa's Nerdville, I think Norman's Rare Guitars would be, except that you can't buy the guitars at Joe Bonamassa's Nerdville, and you can at Norman's Rare Guitars.
Right.
So there's been something that's burning, kind of stuck in my craw for the better part of 36 years now. And I had to put it as the first question. I know that Zemeckis and company came to you looking for instruments for Back to the Future.
Right.
And as a kid, I didn't know any better, but as I began to know more about guitars, seeing Marty McFly play a guitar that did not exist until 1958 in 1955, how did a Gibson ES345 slip into a movie set in 1955? Did you try to set them straight?
I did. And so what happened was the prop master came to me and he said he wanted something that looked kind of futuristic for 1955. So what I did is I suggested a Gibson Switchmaster.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the time that we did that, a Switchmaster was probably $1,400 or $1,500.
Right.
And I suggested, that they use that. And I told them I would rent it to them for $300 per week. So what ended up happening was they rented the guitar from me and they had it on set for about 8 weeks and never even used it. And, because a lot of times they have the order of how the shots are going to be done and all that. So the day before they were really going to use it for the first time, the prop master opened it and showed it to the director or whoever else it was. And he said, oh, no, I want a guitar that's red with a vibrato bar, a whammy bar and all that, And, I suggested possibly a Stratocaster or something like that. And then they looked through some of the other stuff that I had, and I had an ES345, which was the first year was 58. So and actually for a red one, I think it might be even like late 59. So I told him, I said, this isn't exactly accurate if you use this guitar. And he said, well, we're going to take some artistic liberties. So anyhow, they kept the guitar for 8 weeks, never used it, paid me $300 a week. They could have bought it for $1,400. And I told the prop master, I said, it's ridiculous. Why don't you should have just bought the guitar. He said, don't worry about it. They got plenty of money. They don't care. It's the movies, So finally they opened it up and they did the first scene. And that, I don't know, it might have taken another 2 or 3 weeks. And after they got through, they returned the guitar to me. And I had it, and I was thinking of just keeping the guitar. And what ended up happening was they called me back and they said, we've got to get some, what they call beauty shots of the guitar, which is more close-ups and other things, So they ended up running it for another 3 or 4 weeks. And I mean, they could have bought the guitar 3 times, probably.
Oh my gosh.
So it was one of those things where I did tell them that it's not exactly correct, but they said close enough. I said, I just want to let you know that I'm advising you that it's not going to be exactly time correct. And, at the time, a lot of the movies didn't really care. They figured who knows guitars. I mean, there's a lot of people that do know guitars, and I've done guitars to a lot of other movies, and sometimes they're very conscientious about getting things exactly right. And other
Right.
times they just want something that's just a look. And it's like, with this one, it was the art director, I think it was, who said, no, I want something that's red with vibrato bar and whatever. So it
Right.
ended up working out great. And I ended up selling the guitar to a very good friend of mine years later. And some lady, maybe about 4 or 5 years, came into the store and wanted to sell it back to me for $1 million. I thought she was out of her mind, and I thought that price was insane. But I had this guy, Mark, who works for me, who is now, one of the top people at Gibson. And he says, you don't have any idea, Norm. He says that, that guitar probably was the guitar that made me start playing guitar. You don't know how important an instrument it was. So I still think, it was outrageous at the price that they were talking about. But, he kind of made me believe that there was more importance to it than what I thought.
Interesting. Gosh. Yeah, because I'd always wondered about, had you tried to pressure them kind of into something else? Had
I
you
did. I mean, I tried to guide them correctly based on the time period. And a Switchmaster is kind of a futuristic guitar. It's got 3 pickups and it's got
Yeah.
a 4-position switch where you can get 1, 2, 3 and all the pickups. And that was, their Gibson's top of the line electric at that time. And but they went for what they went for, and I was
Right.
happy. It worked out for me and it worked out for them, I guess. So.
You mentioned that you worked on other movies, and I have to wonder with what it's like these days with either renting out a guitar or loaning a guitar. Do you fear a Hateful Eight kind of scenario? Because I know the Martin Guitar um, Museum obviously won't lend any guitars out anymore because, well, when your lead star smashes a guitar by accident, it kind
Yeah,
of puts a whole sour taste in your mouth for
I
lending
know
out
about
guitars.
that. Yeah, I mean, I think what ended up happening is they had some replicas of the
Mhm.
guitar, and somehow or other, the original guitar ended up getting destroyed in the
Yeah.
fire. But I mean, the thing is that in general, they're very careful. I mean, they have insurance policies on the guitar, and they don't want to be liable for a tremendous amount of money or anything like that. So they're usually pretty careful, and but things do happen, and when you have a
Right.
lot of moving parts and things going on, stuff can happen. But I've never had any problem with renting to movies and any of that stuff. Everything that I've done with it's generally the prop man, and they really take care of the stuff very much.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Because I mean, there are a lot of stories of an actor improvising, like James Caan breaking the camera in The Godfather and things like that, where with something that's irreplaceable, like a
Yeah.
vintage instrument, that's a constant fear. Which kind of leads me a little bit to my next question. Because you're talking about the lady comes back in with a guitar for $1 million, and then you're like, no way.
I thought she was kidding, but I mean, and it probably wasn't very realistic, but it could have been 100,000. That might not be out of line.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if I had $100,000 to spend on that guitar, trust me, I'd do it.
Well, if she comes back to me, I'll ask her if I can
By all
ask
means,
her a little less. There you go.
send her my way. I'll sell everything I own. Um, but is there a guitar that sticks in your mind, like the one that got away? I mean, I have guitars in my life that have come and gone, and I'm like, whatever. But in my mind, there's this one guitar I owned. It was a Gibson ES333. I traded it for an amplifier this is like 5 years ago. And I think about that guitar almost every day. Like, I cannot believe I let that guitar go. Is there a guitar for you that you're like, how did that slip through my fingers?
Well, probably the one that is probably I'm the biggest fool for not doing a deal with this is I was dealing with George Harrison, and this was very early on, about I don't know, early 70s or something like that, and he was like the first big star that I ever dealt with, and I was kind of in awe. I mean, the Beatles were just so big. And what happened was he had a guitar that was stolen from him. And it was a Les Paul that actually Eric Clapton gave him. It was a red guitar that was nicknamed Lucy.
Yep.
And what happened was it was a late 50s Les Paul, and it got stolen from him, and it was sold in a store in Hollywood, and they sold it to a guy who lived in Mexico, half the year and half the year in California. And so what happened was they were able to, from the store, get a line on where the guy was, and they got a hold of him, and they explained the situation. And the guy said, listen, if it's George's guitar, I'd like to make sure he gets it back. But I did buy a late 50s Les Paul from the store, and in good faith, I would like to have another late 50s Les Paul to replace it. And so what happened was they went to a number of music stores. Nobody had it. They went to a store that a friend of mine owned in West LA. It was called University Music. And they asked him, and he said, well, and I didn't have a store at this time. This is before I had a store. He said, there's only one guy I know who might have it. And at the time, I had 3 of them. So he contacted me, and I went to my friend's music store, and then George came in with the Beatles road manager, Mal Evans. And, I told him I have the guitars back in my apartment. I brought them back to where I was living in Sherman Oaks. My wife was in her bathrobe, and I said, George Harrison's coming in. And she said, yeah, right. So, but anyhow, he did. And he ended up buying 2 of them from me, and a 56 Stratocaster and Tweed Princeton amp. I had guitars all over the place at the time. And at the time, he said, you wouldn't necessarily want to be interested in my Country Gentleman Gretsch guitar. And that's probably the guitar that's the most related to George Harrison of all guitars. And at the time I said, I don't really care for Gretsch guitars. And I didn't think anybody would believe me that I had actually dealt with George Harrison, because he was the first big star I ever dealt with. And he's one of the biggest stars in the entire world. So I figured my friends would probably say, yeah, right. That's
Right.
George's guitar, and who knows. So I passed on that. Later on, I mean, if that may be the most valuable guitar in the world.
Yeah.
So that was if there's ever a regret. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I regret, but that is the biggest regret.
That I hurt for you a little bit. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I'd like to have one of George Harrison's toenail clippings for Pete's sake. I mean, so okay.
Well,
so
you're easily amused. I wasn't interested in those either. So.
Oh, good. Well, he offered them. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah,
George is an interesting guy.
I might have asked had I know I had a buyer for it. Yeah.
Hey, trust me. I mean, eBay, you can sell anything these days.
That's right.
So in thinking about, you mentioned that your friend at Gibson who started playing guitar because of the Back to the Future and the influence that these people have on us. What got you interested in guitars? Why guitars? Why these things?
Well, I was mainly a keyboard player. I played Hammond organ, and I was playing with some really good musicians in Miami, and there were 2 guitar players, and both of them played bass, but neither of them had a bass. And I just suggested, well, maybe I'll buy a bass, and I'll buy something used, and you guys can use it, and maybe I'll learn to play bass, at a later time. So I ended up looking in the newspaper in Miami, and there was an ad, and a guy was selling an older Fender jazz bass. And, they didn't even call things vintage at the time. It was just a used bass. And I was just looking for something kind of utility that the guys could use. So I ended up buying this bass. It was kind of a little beat up. These days, that's a really good thing. But back then, it was like a used instrument that was very well played.
Right.
So I ended up buying it, and then all these guys were going, I love that bass. I want to buy it. And they were, I think I paid something like $125 for it, and people had offered me $300 or $400 for the bass. And I was going, wow, I mean, this may be a way that I can actually make some money, because I wasn't making a whole lot of money playing music.
Yeah.
So that kind of gave me the idea that, there was a market for this kind of stuff. And basically they were used instruments, but the guys that I played with, one guy's name is Bobby Caldwell, and he's had a number of big hits, from later on. And he was a real good guitar player. And there was another guitar player named Bobby Jabbo in the band, and he had an ES-335. And he always would point out to us, well, this guitar is a lot cooler than the ones they're making today. And he kind of pointed out the shape of the neck and the sound of the pickups that had PAFs and that kind of thing. So, it was just, that was my learning and my schooling, was that these guys, were telling me, the old instruments sold wood. There wasn't as much demand for the guitars. So there was a lot more care being put into the instruments. A lot of times, the wood would be aged 100 years or 50 or 100 years before it ever became an instrument.
Right.
After the Beatles became popular, every kid in the world wanted to be a guitar player. So they were like, they didn't have the time to age the wood. They had to bring in people off the street to build guitars. Before that, these guys were like lifers. These guys, kind of, worked all their lives building guitars, and it was an art form. But now, because of the demand, they just knock a lot of guitars out quick. So the quality control went down, the quality of the woods went down. So this was kind of brought to my attention. And I used to go with my wife, Marlene. We'd go in Miami, and we've been married for 52 years. We were going out early on. And we would go, there was an old guy who was a repairman in Miami. His name was John Black, and he was a guitar repairman, and he loved to talk to me and kind of tell me about the history of guitars and, the models and what they were. And I was like some young kid who was like, eager to hear anything. And, I'd ask him all these questions, and my wife would be kind of grabbing me by the arm. I think it's time to go now. I go, no, I think I want a little more, so he gave me an education in a lot of this stuff. And he was an old guy at the time, and he'd pull out a guitar and he'd go, this guitar was played on the radio by the Gold Dust Twins in 19 and whatever, So, the guy was really instrumental in getting me to love and to be curious about the history. And there was no internet. There were no books really that had, really talked about vintage guitars and the differences and what was going on, the amount of production, how many guitars were made per year, the models, the differences and all that. So when they first started doing books about guitar, I was one of the consultants in, this is probably in the late 60s, early 70s, when people started showing a real solid interest because, most music stores and most guitar players didn't even know there was a thing about the old guitars. So, it was just something that kind of developed. And Vintage Guitar Magazine, Guitar Player Magazine, which was the first one, they had the very last page of the magazine was called the Rare Bird column. And so they would pick one guitar every issue and they would talk about it. And so they needed information. So they got a lot of that from me. And then eventually this guy, Tom Wheeler, who ended up writing this first really book about vintage guitars. It was called American Guitars by Tom Wheeler. He used me. I was the first credit that he gave as far as, information went.
Man, to think about there being a time where not only were these guitars just, a 59 Gibson Les Paul was just another used guitar. And then people starting to realize how special they are. And of course, they picking them back up in 1968 and never ceasing production again. The people really started to get that, oh yeah, these things are something special. By
the way, when I first started buying and selling guitars, you could have bought a Sunburst Les Paul for $800.
Please don't say that.
And people were so they were $800 seems so much. I mean, people are going, $800? Are you crazy? They would be like outraged. $800.
Oh my gosh.
And then they went to about $1,500, and people kept going, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You could buy a new one for $300, and you're going to pay $1,500 for an old one. Then it got to $2,500 and people were yelling and screaming. Then it went to 5,000. Then it went to 10,000. It went to 25,000. When it got to about 50,000, people are going, these are pretty good investment. So,
Oh
it took
gosh.
quite a while before people really got it. But, now it's so universal. There's Vintage Guitar Magazine, which kind of specializes in vintage guitars. And there's just a lot of information now on the internet about vintage guitars. So now it's a worldwide phenomenon, but back then it was not.
And we're in this state now. I have the benefit of the knowledge, but not the benefit of the opportunity. These deals, oh, there was a guitar in my grandma's attic. Do you want to take a look at it? Oh, it's an old Gibson, I think it is. Oh, it says it was a Les Paul signed the headstock or something. Those kinds of things don't really happen. I'm glad.
No, well, because the internet really has let all the information out there. Most people kind of, investigate what they have or go to a music store and ask about something, so, but back in the day, there was no printed information. You couldn't go on the computer. There were no computers,
Right.
So, I mean, it was sort of word of mouth and, very select group of people that knew or cared.
Gosh. So thinking now about how we kind of exist now, that where we have all this knowledge at our fingertips, but it does spread out amongst everybody. So finding deals is a little more difficult because there's nobody who doesn't know what they have anymore. And the nice thing is that we can research, we can find out, oh, what kind of wood, what kind of glue, how do they make the pickups? And you can reconstruct some of these things. But for somebody who's buying an investment guitar, a vintage instrument, because we have all this knowledge at our fingertips, do you have any advice for people who are maybe buying guitar, not to play, not even to really ever touch, but to put to stock away? What advice do you have for these people?
I would advise them not to do that. I would advise them to buy something that they're going to love and play. Because when I bought these guitars, I didn't know if the values really were going to continue to go up. I mean, I loved what I had, and I loved all the little things about them that made them special. If you're going to buy it and just stash it, I don't advise that, because the real beauty of having these things is, whether they go up and down or in value, is that you get to pick them up. They make music. They have their own voice and all that kind of stuff. So I have a lot of people who are investor types that buy instruments from me, but I would say that none of them don't play. They all, that's a double negative, but I mean, they all have an interest because they love music, whether they love Eric Clapton or Jimmy Page or Jimi Hendrix or Wes Montgomery or whoever it would be. There's a reason they want an instrument, because they hope that it'll make them sound like their hero and stuff. And the real bottom line is that the truth is that 95% of it, I don't want to hurt my own business, is in the player and in the hands and in the mind and the heart of the player. But, having a good tool is really great. So, it's, being a great player and having the right tools is the right combination. So I wouldn't recommend people buying something unless they love it and can enjoy it, because that's 90% of it.
I'm so glad to hear you say that.
If you like it well enough, then somebody else probably is going to like it too.
Right. I think about guitars that were not loved, and people would think you'd be crazy for buying, like, why are you buying a Travis Bean? It has that cold neck. And now try to find a Travis Bean under $5,000, But I think about, how lucky we are with being able to have this kind of access. And hearing you saying that, yes, if you buy a $250,000 5960 whatever Gibson Les Paul standard, play it. I love hearing that, because people who don't use their gear, yes, you're the person who purchased it and you can do with it what you like. You spend your money on it, that's fine. But there's a shame of that. There are only 1,400 or so Gibson Les Pauls from 58 through 59 or through 60.
I think it's a little bit more, but not that, and that included the gold top. 57 gold top through 60, standards of the time. But it's not that you should be shamed for not playing, but that's the whole, to love the thing is is so important. And to know that your heroes played the sounds that were coming out of their guitars, these were the same type of guitars. So, if you could learn to play like him, you could sound like him.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a reason that we want to play. There's a reason I bought a Les Paul, because I like, oh yeah, there's this artist. I love Peter Green, so I want to play that
Absolutely.
stuff. So and I was just thinking about this. I know this wasn't on the sheet that I sent you, but talking about the number of Les Paul standards built from 58 through 60. And there's the old joke of like they built 1,400 of them, and now there are 3,000. So
Well, that's the thing, is you have to know who you're buying from, because there are a lot of armchair experts that have never held one, but they pontificate about them, and as if they are an expert. And you can get all that stuff, all the written information about them, but unless you really know what to look like, what the texture of the finish is, what to look for in reissues or duplications. I don't advise buying something really expensive unless you're buying it through somebody who's knowledgeable and is going to either put in writing that what they're selling you is exactly what it is. Sometimes people try to save money by buying it in a way, through somebody privately, and if they're not an expert themselves, they take a chance. But if you buy it from a reputable dealer, then at least you're going to get what you're paying for.
That's great advice. So, okay, then is there a guitar that you haven't had through the shop that you would think, oh my gosh, I would love to have this here. I would love to see this come through?
Well, the one guitar that everybody has kind of lusted for is a Gibson Modern.
Oh,
So
yeah.
in the late 50s, Gibson introduced three guitars: the Flying V, the Explorer, and the Modern. Now, the Modern, nobody has really seen one that's really bona fide and that is real. There are a couple that are a little suspect, but they made very few of them. And these guitars were super futuristic at the time. So a lot of the guitar players back in the day, even the rock and roll players, were mainly jazz players that were playing rock and roll because they knew they could make a buck doing it. So they were playing these hollow body guitars, and a lot of them they call them like a plank of wood.
Yeah.
So they made something like 35 Explorers. I'm not sure what the amount of these, I think some 91 or something to that effect. And the Modern, they suspect that they made several, but nobody's seen one. So,
right.
There are reissues of it, and they had pictures from the schematics and all that, what they were supposed to have looked like. But strangely enough, one that everybody has agreed upon that it is what it is has never came to surface.
Yeah, I heard a lot of rumors about like, oh, supposedly Billy Gibbons has one stashed away or something, and
Well, I know Billy. I'm not aware that he does, but I mean, there's been a couple that have gone to like a couple trade shows that I've been at, and it's been like, mixed reviews as to whether they're right or they're not,
right,
So,
right.
and again, it's very difficult. How would you even know if you've never seen one to compare it to? It should be Carina wood. There are certain things by the textures and the finish, patent applied for pickups, the wiring. If you see that the wiring has been messed with or things have been done to it, then who knows what it originally had, and so there's you almost have to be like a private investigator to look through all these and check off one by one. Is this original? Is that original? Does this make sense? Is there anything that's questionable? Because I mean, a lot of times if there's something that I call gray, where it's not, there's black and white, which are absolutely right. There's other ones that are absolutely wrong. And then there's some that may or may not be. I don't usually like to mess with anything that I'm not 100% sure about, because I don't want to represent something and then have it be, a fake.
Right, right. I think that's a really fair point, because I think there are a lot of people who are willing to plunk down money almost as a gamble on some of these things, and the gambles sometimes don't pay off. That letter of authenticity that you thought looked really nice, well, you can make it on a typewriter. I fear for some people's wallets.
Well, thank goodness. I mean, most of the time, people are fairly cautious, and it can be the Wild West out there, but most people do their research, know who they're buying from, and if you're going to take that chance of buying from somebody off the street, and you don't know what to look for yourself, then it's really a big gamble. But amongst most of the dealers, there's sort of a code of ethics that if you make a mistake or two or a few, the word gets out and then nobody wants to deal with you. So most of the time, the most reputable dealers are very careful.
Right. That makes sense. Well, there's some, gosh, I hate to jump backwards, but I kind of have to because I mentioned Billy Gibbons and I know you know him. And there's something I've always been curious about people who are in the kind of world that you're in, dealing with people that you deal with, which is, do you get starstruck? And if so, who gets you starstruck?
At this point, not as much because the truth of the matter is they're just people, and they're
Right.
that people that are very talented, people that are very lucky, and back in the day in the '60s and stuff, a lot of people were using a lot of drugs, and a lot of the time, I'm not even sure if they were completely in control of how they acted. Sometimes
Right.
they were, they would throw it in your face and stuff like that. But in general, I've met a lot of really great, nice people, and they're just regular folks like everybody else. And the one thing that has been very lucky for me is that, the way people treat rock stars, I've actually been treated like that from rock stars because I have what they want. I mean, I have the guitars that they love, and we speak the same language about the guitars. So, we can communicate, we can sit there and talk about guitars for a long time, and it's something they're interested in. They don't always get a chance to talk to somebody who knows a lot of the old stuff, and all the little details and that kind of thing. So just the fact that we speak the same language, I think, makes it pretty comfortable. And most of the people are really, really nice. I mean, I don't, I can't even say, I've had a couple little incidents where I was a little intimidated, but I don't even want to mention the name, and they were sort of, they had their heads up their butts, but not
Right.
many. I mean, most of them are just really nice and just, love to converse about guitars and that kind of. So, but in general, I mean, with George Harrison, I was more in shock than anything because I had never dealt with anybody, really, like that. I mean, when I was in Miami, and this is before I really dealt in guitars, before I started doing it, my band, we opened for Jimi Hendrix, we opened for Cream, we opened for the Amboy Dukes, we opened for Chambers Brothers. There was a place in Miami that was like this one big venue, and there were like 4 local bands that played, and every week they would bring in a national or international act. So, but it was basically, be standing in a dressing room or something, and hey, how you doing? How you doing? And that was the
Right.
end of the conversation. I didn't really have the knowledge to really talk about guitars with them. So I wish I would have, maybe with Hendrix or something like
Right.
that.
I know, but looking back and with the lens of hindsight, it's very easy to think woulda, shoulda, coulda. But I mean, did a lot, so I mean, things turned out okay. So in
Very
talk,
lucky. I mean, a lot of it is luck and being in the right place at the right time. I came out from Miami to California. It was the center of everything, and I had a lot of opportunities to buy and see and play a lot of guitars that if I was still in Miami at that time, I never would have had the opportunity.
right.
So, a lot of it is just luck, and I'm a very hard worker, so I love what I do, so I don't mind putting in. I just got up this morning. It's a Sunday,
Right.
and I bought 15 guitars this morning. So, I mean, and the people are going, it's Sunday. What are you doing coming out? I said, this is,
It's what you do. I'm a little jealous about getting to see the Amboy Dukes, Ted Nugent era,
yeah,
an old
yeah.
band. I mean, my gosh. So in thinking about the state of the industry, I keep seeing a lot of these scare headlines or stories about the death of the guitar hero, about the guitar going away. What's your thought on the state of the industry?
Well, a few years ago, there was a trade magazine or two that kind of predicted the demise of guitars, and it has proven to be completely wrong.
Good.
And I think it's pretty unanimous that there's a tremendous amount of interest in guitar. The one thing that the guitar has, people say to me, why is the guitar so popular? Well, the one thing is that you can bend a note on a guitar, and the vibrato that you get is almost like a voice.
Mm.
Not a lot of instruments can do that. I mean, you can do that maybe on a violin, but then you're basically talking about one note at a time as opposed to chords and stuff like that. So, there's certain things, and like in a piano, you can play and completely accompany yourself, or an organ or a synthesizer, but guitar is portable. You can walk around, play every part, sing the tune, and you're one and done. Where, most other instruments, trumpet, you can't exactly play it and sing at the same time, or if you could, you'd be a mega star. So, but that's there's a lot of things about guitar that are so cool, and they're almost like a part of your body.
Yeah, I completely agree. I can't imagine life without one. So why do guitarists have such a fascination beyond the build quality of old guitars, of things like Gibson in their heyday in the 1950s and Fender in the 1950s and very early 60s? What is it about these old designs that have captured guitars? Every time Gibson tries to come out with a new body style, everybody complains. They say, "Oh, it looks terrible." Fender tries to come out with new color schemes or new truss rod adjustments, and everybody says, "Just make it like the old." Why are we like this?
Well, the truth of the matter is, for certain eras, there's like a renaissance. Like for Martin guitars, I mean, Martins have been made since the 1800s, I think 1833, or 34, whenever they first really started producing
Right.
them. And but the most valuable Martins are made from the 30s through the 60s. Brazilian rosewood had a lot to do with, that, and also the perfection of design. Like by the late 20s, you could, build a steel string guitar that was braced for steel strings that 14 frets, but prior to that, everything was a slotted head, like a classical with 12, and, that kind of thing. So, for the electric guitars, probably the heyday or renaissance was from 55 through maybe 65,
Mm-hmm.
and preferably 57 through about 61 is the time. So, and they're still building a lot of stuff. And later on, even in the later 60s, like a lot of the Gibsons had a narrower nut width. A lot of
Yeah.
people didn't like that. The early 60s, the neck was even at the nut. And as it went up the neck, it went up the neck even, where the, later 60s, it started out kind of narrow, and then it would get wider
Mm-hmm.
as, so some of the things, the perfection in design, it's like when you create the wheel, you know, what, where do you go from there?
Right.
Some of the things were so perfect in design that there was no reason, I mean, all these companies have a research and development department. And for the most part, almost unnecessary, because the stuff that they were building was so applicable to today's use and everything,
Mm-hmm.
so it's just the perfection of design and all that at certain times. So a lot of these instruments, that's why, they're doing these reissues now, and a lot of them are really good, and they keep doing one little thing almost every year. It's kind of like planned obsolescence. They try to come up with something for the next year that's going to make you want to get rid of last year's model to get the new one, and that kind of thing. So, but the companies have really kind of woke up, because what was happening is the American companies were getting a lot of competition from Japan and, overseas. And they were also in competition with themselves. Their earlier instruments were bringing more money than the new ones. And they're kind of going, well, what's with this? So they kind of went back to the drawing board and kind of realized what they were doing right and tried to.
Mm. So I was going to get to the last question, but I'm afraid I have to throw this one in here because this is something that's kind of been rattling in the back of my brain for about a decade. Is, do you think that some of these guitars, like, okay, let's take the Gibson Les Paul, for example, did they kind of arrive at perfection by accident? Because
I think it was just based on the need. The design just kind of got perfected. Like, for the Les Paul, for instance, back in the day, there were no cutaway guitars. So then as people started playing up higher on the neck, you wanted to have access to the higher part of the neck. Then, like the very first Les Pauls are worth less than the later 50s because they had what was called the trapeze bridge. And the intonation, you couldn't intonate the guitar perfectly because you had 6 strings on this wraparound tailpiece. And then eventually they went to, in like the end of 53, just a stop tailpiece. And because a lot of people didn't like the trapeze would get in your way kind of when you play. Then they came up with the tunematic bridge, and that was where they got into perfection, because then you could intonate each string and you could play up and down the neck and not have the guitar be way out of tune from if you're playing at the lower end of the neck to the higher part of the neck. And then the humbucking pickup, which, is something that, eliminated a lot of hum and buzz. That's what the humbucking was. If you had a fluorescent light above you or something like that, you would get like a buzz. So these pickups canceled each other out to kind of get rid of some of that. So all of this stuff was, once they did that, there wasn't really any further
where else do you
that
go?
they needed to go. I mean, you could create a different variation of that, but those were the things that were necessary in order to make people.
Right. We had a lot of innovation that came later, with the Floyd Rose and Steinberger trans trams and active pickups and all this crazy stuff. But we keep kind of coming back to the simplicity of, the hunk of wood and these coils of wire that we don't really need much more. These gimmicks kind of come and go. Not the Floyd Rose, obviously.
People who invent, they want to see if they can take it a step further. And there's some things. One of the greatest things that's been invented in the last number of years has been the Snark tuner, because it fits the top of your guitar and they're inexpensive and it's easy to tune up. A lot of people can't even tune by ear anymore because it's, almost been like a crutch that people can use to get the guitar much more in tune. So, but I think, when you were talking about, the death of guitar too, I think a lot of it has to do with styles of music. And, heavy metal, at one time was extremely popular. And then there was fusion and, early rock and roll, those guys. Everything kind of evolves into different things. Now, what's kind of strange is that, when you look at the award shows like the American Music Awards, the Grammys, or stuff like that. It's a singer up there. There's a couple musicians in the back and 9 dancers. It's almost like the dance awards. So I mean, they should almost go back to having music awards and everybody sort of polarized into what they like. One guy likes folk music, one guy likes classical, one guy likes rhythm and blues or blues, and next likes rock and roll. The other ones want metal or fusion, so everybody's kind of polarized. Back in the day, there was a top 40 radio thing and there were 40 tunes. And whether it was country or whether it was blues or whether it was rock or whatever, all those things were mixed in there. And I don't think people discerned all the differences. And then all of a sudden now there's a chart for every type of music.
Yeah. The polarization, the fracturization, of course, with the internet has increased it even more, because now if you are into early 90s stoner doom metal, you have an entire catalog of stuff and community you can deal with.
And you can get it at your fingertips in, 2 seconds.
Yeah, go onto YouTube and listen to it all you want. So I've really been curious for a long time, because you get people who deal in a lot of instruments, a lot of guitars, and getting an opinion from somebody who has the breadth of knowledge. A lot of us have head knowledge, and of course, I could rail for about an hour on the internet forum experts, as you mentioned earlier. That we all kind of rightfully avoid trying to be. I know I
Well,
really try to avoid that.
you want the knowledge and you want all the information, but
Right.
unless it's firsthand where you actually see, feel, and play the instrument,
Mm-hmm.
you can write all these things down, but it doesn't really gel until you know what once you have them in your
Exactly.
hand.
I want to have as much firsthand knowledge as I can possibly have. I'm obsessed with playing. Like if somebody says I have a guitar, like, okay, I want to see it. Maybe it's one I haven't seen before. Maybe it's one I haven't played before. So what is your favorite guitar and why?
Well, I have a number of favorites, and a lot of it has to do with what you're feeling when you get up in the morning. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I love great flat top acoustic steel string, arch top jazz guitars that are acoustic, then arch top jazz guitars that are electric, then the thin body guitars like the ES335, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
Les Paul Strat, the Telly, on Jaguar
Mm-hmm.
Jazz, all that kind of stuff. But I guess if I had to have one electric on an island, it might be an ES335 because it
Mm-hmm.
covers territory. And my buddy Joe Bonamassa, he calls 335s the burst killers. And he's right, because they really do sound fantastic.
Yeah.
Sometimes the shape of the body is not, and that's, what people, the visual of a lot of this stuff has a lot to do.
Yeah, that's right there is why I still kick myself for getting rid of my ES333 because it was the most versatile, perfect guitar. You just made me miss it even more. Okay, so first off, thank you very much for taking the time with me. I do, before we go, want to mention there is coming something that excites me as a fan of guitars, guitar shops, these wealth of these things that we love so much, and that is that you have a documentary coming up. And can you talk about that? I don't want to give away any secrets.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's no problem. We're almost done, filming it and all that. And it actually, you're friends with my daughter, so that's how this conversation came about.
Right, right.
So my daughter wanted to do a documentary on the store just to kind of let her kids know, after I'm gone, I'm getting there, what I did and, just a little of the history and all that. And I told my daughter, Sarah, and I told my daughter, I said, listen, if you want to do it, that's up to you. But I don't want you to start bothering my friends and my customers and asking them to be interviewed and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And basically told me, like a lot of daughters tell their dads, shut up and keep quiet. I'm going to do what I want to do and I'm taking care of it. So the
Yeah.
women in my life, I have to pretty much obey. So I just kept my mouth shut. But then what happened was she started calling a bunch of my friends and nobody really refused to do an interview and all that. So it started, with, people like Vince Gill, who's now with the Eagles. He's a great country star, and Slash, who's a friend of mine, Post Malone, Machine Gun Kelly, a couple of actors who were guitar players, Jeff Daniels, Jeff Garland, Malcolm McDowell from Clockwork Orange. His son is an excellent guitar player and artist. And then it, just kept going. Lenny Kravitz and Robbie Robertson from the band, and Dave Amato from REO Speedwagon, and it just keeps going on and on and on. And they probably have about 150 hours filmed, and they're trying to condense it into a couple-hour documentary and kind of talk about, all the different stages that the store went through and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And it really kind of blossomed into something. And Kiefer Sutherland, who's an old friend of mine who has been a customer for years, has agreed to be the executive producer with my daughter. So it's like, I don't know where it came from, but I'm grateful, and I'm flattered that these guys didn't tell Sarah to go take a hike or whatever.
Right.
But it was really, I mean, it's really cool of them. And I think, it's sort of, the store has been almost like the barber shop where, a lot of these guys, I mean, now it's with COVID and everything,
Yeah.
little different, but I mean, it was like a hangout where these guys got to talk to other people who were like-minded, who liked the same thing as them. And, you know, when it's a hobby, you know, and sometimes it's a hobby, sometimes it's their business, but people like to talk about the things that they really love. So you can't talk about vintage guitars to somebody who knows nothing about guitars or music. So when you get a few of those guys together, it's a hangout.
Hmm.
So again, I'm anxious to see the documentary. They won't even let me see it at this point yet. You know, again, she's taking control, and as she usually does. So I'm grateful, but I'm anxious to see it.
Yeah, I have a 2-year-old daughter who's my boss as well. I understand completely. But
Wait and see. It's all coming.
oh, it's already happened. Trust me. Uh, but that is exciting. I really look forward to seeing that a lot because again, it's this thing of where since it's something that I can talk about forever. I could sit and talk guitars. I mean, I have friends who had friends in high school who are like, if you talk about guitars anymore, man, I can't hang out with you anymore. You know, and so having something where you see that kind of product from people who are like that, who, you know, were like who you wish you could have hung out with in high school. That's something really, really special. I really, really look forward to seeing this documentary. And I also cannot tell you how happy I am that you were able to spend, oh gosh, way more than I thought you would spend.
No problem. I'm always glad to talk to people that love the same thing that I do. So, because it
oh
means a
gosh.
lot to me. And, I never in a million years would have imagined that there would be as much interest in these instruments and the history and all that there is. Because, I mean, I thought it would always be kind of an inside thing and it'd be a group of about, 100 people that loved it. And, now it's international.
You
And
find out.
also, our social media has kind of exploded too. The videos and stuff that we do at the store. We have a really big following, and we do this thing, Guitar of the Day, and we have this guy, Michael Lemo, who's like one of the greatest players I've ever heard in my life and super versatile. And we have a lot of really good players who work at the store. My friend Nick Dias, who's a British guy that I've known for many years. He's an excellent player. Brandon Soriano is an excellent guitar player. Dylan, who works for us, who is one of the newest to join the group, is terrific. So there's, we have a lot of good players, and these videos people have fallen in love with. So I'm grateful, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Excellent. Well, in the description below, I will put a link to the Instagram page so you guys can go see those Guitar of the Day pics and videos. Obviously, I'll link the Norman's Rare Guitars website as well. Norman Harris, legend in what we do and what we love, these weird instruments that we have all kind of become body parts of ours. I appreciate you so much taking the time to talk guitars with me. I hope we can do it again sometime. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your Sunday.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul. I really appreciate it. And thanks for, conducting a great interview. And also you asked the right questions. So
Well, you gave the right answers. That makes it a lot easier on my end as well. Go and buy some amazing guitars. I want to see some more great guitars show up on that Instagram feed that I have to go and peruse over for a while.
For as long as I can get around, I'm going to do that. So I mean, again, I'm getting up there in age, but when I find a great guitar, somebody calls me about a great guitar, I still get excited about it. So it's nice to have a business that you can actually love enough to want to get up in the morning and go to work.
Mm-hmm. I know the feeling. Norman, thanks again so much. Have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. I hope you all appreciate that I'm doing this for you guys, obsessed with guitar fans, however many of you are out there. I'll have to check what the subscriber list is at this time, but it's an honor and a pleasure. And gosh, I could talk for another 5 hours with you. I appreciate it so much.
All right, well, thank you very much. And I hope that the listeners, I mean, if they're watching this and they love guitars, they'll get it. Somebody who doesn't, they'll think we're from Mars or something. And,
I'm glad to have a wife that lets me indulge in this passion, because it's easy to get married to somebody who doesn't get it, but she's like, you're passionate about it. Go, and I know it's Sunday night, and go do this interview right now. She's excited for me. And I'm like, oh, I married the right person. So
great.
Thanks again.
That's important.
Oh, yes, it is.
Thank you. And thanks you guys
again
for watching it.
I appreciate it.